All right, so let's jump right in, shall we? Let's talk about something uh, pretty incredible. Like right now, as we speak, inside your head, you've got the most complex entity, the most complex thing
Yeah.
that we know of in the entire universe, and it's your brain.
Yeah.
We're talking about billions of neurons, to like 50 to 100
Yeah.
billion,
It's a huge number.
each one of them potentially, connected to thousands of others. I mean, it's just an insane level of interconnectedness. And for you, like as someone who, wants to get to the core, like the crucial information quickly, I think that complexity is exactly what makes this whole thing so fascinating. This idea of development, right? How does this all come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's not something that just pops into existence, fully formed. A lot of it happens, like, the foundational wiring. It happens early on. And it's really shaped by your experiences. So genes, yeah, they play a big role. They provide the initial blueprint. In fact, half of our genes are dedicated to the central nervous system, but they can't dictate every single connection, right? That's where the environment comes in. It's like a master sculptor. It really shapes
That
things.
does, and that's what this whole deep dive is really about. We're going deep into, we got some text here, we'll just call it 8.pdf, and we're trying to understand how this remarkable organ, the brain, develops, especially during infancy. Like, what are those key influences that shape it? I think our mission here is to give you like a clear, concise picture of this extraordinary process.
Absolutely. So I guess, to really understand it, we got to start at the very beginning, at birth, right? And one of the things that immediately makes us stand out as humans is the development of our frontal lobes. They're pretty advanced right from the start. Oliver Sacks, he noted this beautifully. He talked about the great development of the frontal lobes in humans and how it's not as prominent in other primates or
So the
mammals.
frontal lobes, right? I feel like we hear about those all the time, but I think for our listeners, the key takeaway is that they're like the executive control centers of the brain. What do they do? What abilities do they underpin that are so human?
Oh, they're crucial for all the higher level functions. Like Sachs pointed out, they're really involved in hand movements, those fine motor skills that let us like manipulate things. But it goes even further than that. Problem solving, navigating social interactions, even the foundation of language, all those things that make us human. And these are the areas that keep developing after we're born, which makes those early experiences so important.
That makes total sense. You think about the animal kingdom, right? Like a newborn horse, they can stand up and walk pretty quickly. Baby aves, they cling to their mothers.
Right.
But human infants, they're totally helpless, and they need a long time to develop, like even basic coordination.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And that just highlights another key point, the immaturity of the human brain at birth compared to like other mammals. They come pre-programmed with more skills, I guess you could say. And for us, our brains develop outside the womb for longer. That lets us adapt to, whatever environment we're in. Like it takes almost a year for a human infant to develop the vision, the muscle control, balance, all that stuff for things that like other mammals just they can do right away.
So we're born less finished, so to speak.
Yeah.
That sets the stage for all this postnatal brain growth that we see in humans. The text, it points out a pretty big difference between us and chimpanzees in this area.
Yeah, it's quite a difference. So while chimpanzee's brain, it roughly doubles in size from birth to adulthood, a human brain quadruples. So that's 75% of our brain growth happening after we're born. And most of that happens in the first few years.
Whoa, okay. So three-quarters of our brain development is happening outside the womb. That's wild. So for you, the listener, I think it's important to really understand the scale of this postnatal growth. So what are the advantages? Why so much development after we're born?
Well, the text suggests that it's a trade-off. It's linked to our upright posture and the evolution of our hands. So by, freeing up our forelimbs, we could do more, more delicate, more complex actions. And that drove the growth of the brain, especially the frontal lobes we were just talking about. They need that flexibility to learn, to adapt to different environments. If our brains were like totally programmed by our genes at birth, we wouldn't be as good at adapting to new places, new situations. So our initial helplessness, I guess, is the price we pay for being able to learn and adapt later on.
I see. So it's like our helplessness at birth is actually a key to our adaptability later on. But this also ties into, the whole childbirth thing, right? Like
Yeah.
the text mentions the narrow human pelvis.
Yeah, it's a constraint, right? Like if we stayed in the womb for much longer than 9 months, we'd just be like too big to be born safely. Even now, at the end of a pregnancy, the baby's head, that's the biggest part and the most likely to have problems during birth. So the solution was to you know, get born earlier and have the brain develop more outside the womb.
I see. So then that makes experience like way more important in shaping the brain, right?
Oh.
The text, it quotes Antonio Damasio, who says that a lot of our adult brain circuitry is like individual and unique, reflecting our personal history. So for you, the listener, that means your experiences, they've literally wired your brain differently from anyone else's.
Right. It's like the genes are the blueprint, but the environment, our interactions with the world, they fine-tune the neural connections. And this isn't just happening over a lifetime, it's happening super fast in those first few years. Even identical twins who have almost the same genes will develop different patterns in their nerve cells and connections just because of their experiences.
And the speed of all this is crazy. The text says that 5/6 of nerve cell branching, it happens after birth. And in the first year, we're talking about like 3 billion new synapses, those connections, every second. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And that rapid development, it sets the stage for how our brains work for our whole lives, you know? It determines which brain structures develop, how strong they are, how efficient. It's this whole dance between our potential and our environment, and it shapes us like at the deepest level.
So that brings us to this idea of neural Darwinism. It sounds kind of like survival of the fittest, but like in the brain. Can you break that down for our listener?
So imagine a competition inside your brain. You've got nerve cells, circuits, networks. They're all competing for resources. The neurons and connections that are used the most, the ones that are most helpful for, surviving, thriving in your specific environment, they get stronger. The ones that aren't used, they weaken and disappear. So use it or lose it, but on a brain level.
So the things we do, see, learn, those things are deciding which connections get stronger, more permanent.
Exactly. And this even affects our neurochemicals, the chemicals that let neurons talk to each other. If certain pathways aren't used, those chemicals, they can diminish, and the brain might even produce less of them over time. It really shows how important the environment is. You can have all this genetic potential, but without the right experiences, the right support, it might not reach its full potential.
Wow, okay. That really underscores the importance of environment. And the text has some pretty powerful examples of what happens when that's missing, like an infant raised in a do's room.
Yeah, it's a harsh example, but it really makes you think. Imagine a baby with perfect eyes, all the neural stuff to see. But if they're kept in darkness for too long, especially in those early years, the visual pathways, they won't develop right. Even
Yeah.
the brain structures that were there at birth, they can atrophy. After about 5 years of that, it can be irreversible blindness, even though their eyes are fine. It shows how much the brain needs stimulation.
And it's not just vision, is it? The text also talks about a child who was, never exposed to speech and couldn't learn to speak.
Right. It's the same principle, just with language. We need that exposure, that interaction for the brain circuits to form correctly. The brain has a window. And the text even links this, like this idea of not getting enough input to things like attention deficit disorder. It,
Hmm.
it suggests that maybe it's a result of the brain not wiring properly or not having the right balance of chemicals.
So, okay. So if the environment is so critical, what are the optimal conditions? Like for a baby's brain to develop in a healthy way, what does it need?
Well, the text, it boils it down to three things.
Hmm.
These things are present in the womb, adequate nutrition, physical safety, and an unbroken relationship with a safe maternal figure. It's like the womb is like the ultimate matrix, right? It provides everything the baby needs without them having to do anything. It's just pure nurturing.
Powerful analogy. But when the baby's
Right.
born, that womb environment is gone.
Yeah.
How do we best replicate that out here in the real world?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. So in most developed countries, nutrition and shelter, those are usually taken care of, although poverty can obviously disrupt that. But it's the third thing, the emotional security, the feeling of safety that can be harder to maintain, especially with all the stresses of modern life.
It makes sense. We can feed and house a baby, but giving them that deep sense of emotional security, that can be tough. And the text points out how helpless human infants are. They can't even like follow their caregiver or cling to them in those early months.
Exactly. And that's why this idea of extra gestation is so important. Ashley Montague, an anthropologist, he said that the first 9 months or so after birth, it should be seen as like a continuation of gestation, but outside the body. So during that time, the parents, the environment, they need to provide that security, that predictability, just like the womb did, both physically and this is key, emotionally. That bond that used to be physical through the umbilical cord, it now needs to continue in these other ways for the brain to keep developing.
And the text talks about breastfeeding, right? Like how it almost acts as a near substitute for the direct umbilical connection.
Yes. It's not just about the nutrition and the immune benefits. It's that closeness, the warmth, the gradual transition to independence. It deepens that emotional bond. The text even suggests that, maybe the decline in breastfeeding in some countries could be contributing to, some of the emotional issues we see.
Interesting thought. But the text also says that emotional security, like that warmth in the environment, it's even more crucial in breastfeeding for the brain to develop well.
That's a big takeaway for our listeners. Breastfeeding is great, but that consistent emotional connection, that feeling of safety, that's what really helps those self-regulation circuits in the brain to wire properly. And it's not just about the parent's love, it's about their own well-being. If they're stressed all the time, it can affect their ability to provide that calmness, that predictability.
Mhm.
A calm, consistent environment, that's the fertile ground for brain development. If it's disrupted by stress, inconsistency, it can really have a negative impact. And again, the text mentions ADD as a possible consequence of, not having that early security.
So to sum it all up, it sounds like we're born with amazing potential, but it's the environment, especially that emotional security in those first few years, that really shapes our brains. It's not just about genes, it's about having the right environment to let those genes express themselves.
Exactly. The infant brain is incredibly plastic, especially early on, and it's constantly being molded by experiences. A secure, predictable environment with caregivers who are present and attuned, that's the foundation for healthy development, cognitively, emotionally, socially. It's a foundation that lasts a lifetime.
It really makes you think, if the early environment is so important, what does that mean for society? Like, how should we be supporting parents, creating nurturing environments for babies and kids? It makes you reconsider the impact of those early interactions and how important it is to have a supportive structure for families.
It's a huge question. It makes us think about how we can create environments that prioritize the emotional well-being of both infants and their caregivers, recognizing that these early experiences, they don't just affect the individual, they potentially affect all of us.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface here, but we'll definitely be coming back to this and other related topics in future deep dives. So thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been really eye-opening.